Okay, hello everybody. Let's start our online program. Let me introduce myself first. I'm Kim Chung, and together with me is Glacia, my partner, and our two guests. Our guest is first of all, Tat Hui, Hui Jifeng, and we also have a friend from UK, Sam Dunning. Well, thank you so much for joining us. Let me have a brief introduction first. For the next few months, the coup is going to organize a series of online forums on how the CCP is infiltrating on different parts of the world and how Hong Kong people should respond to it. As we all know, in the past few months or in 1 or 2 years, quite a lot of concern is about how the CCP is using its state-led organization, Institute on Confucius, some local community groups, and even consulate staff to infiltrate into different parts of the world, which is somehow having some kind of threat to people all around the world. So we are going to organize a series of forums on this in the next few months to talk about how this has been done in different parts of the world. So for this first round, we are going to talk about the situation in UK and in Australia. To begin with, I would like to say a few words. Coup is committed to truth, and we are going to offer an online platform for everyone to talk about issues which might even be regarded by those in power as sensitive. We hope that we are going to have something to open to everybody, even though our guests are not really representing the standpoint of coup. We would like to see different viewpoints can be put together so that we can think about the issue in a very deep and open manner, so that people can alert the situation and different viewpoints about the same situation. So this is the brief introduction. Let me introduce my two guests. First of all, Sam Dunning, a very young scholar. He had some study on the Institute of Confucius here in UK and had compiled it into a report. And I think Sam will talk about how the Institute of Confucius is now doing some infiltration work in UK and how inadequate is the situation in UK society to cope with this situation. And Tat, I think everybody in Hong Kong knows Tat quite well. He was an ex-councillor for the Electoral, and now he is now staying in Australia. Still have a very great concern on Hong Kong situation, working on some Hong Kong related issues, and he is now a legal practitioner in Australia. So this is the introductory remark, and I think I would like to invite Glacia to have a few greetings to our guests.
Hello, I'm Chung Chen Kwong or Glacia Kwong. I'm IPAC's Hong Kong campaign lead, and I'm very happy to be joining all of you here to discuss a topic that's very important, that is like overseas infiltration. And I look forward to having a very fruitful discussions with all of you. And for the audience, if you have any questions that you want to ask our guests, please feel free to drop it in the comment box, and we will have a brief Q&A session after our guests have shared the views.
Our forum is going to be bilingual, so we will ask Tat first, and Glacia will summarize a little bit so that Sam would know what Tat had talked about and could respond to it later, right? 首先咧，我諗我哋請許智峰講先啦。許智峰大家知道啦，佢離開咗香港，而家澳洲咧就從事緊法律工作，已經成為一位正式嘅執業律師。咁佢一直咧都好關心香港情況，大家亦都有眼睇㗎啦。咁咧就佢點解揾佢嚟啦？咁因為佢對於中共喺即係澳洲或者鄰近地區嘅一啲滲透工作咧，都有一啲認識同了解嘅。咁所以首先咧，我哋想請許智峰咧簡單講一講，其實你喺澳洲生活咗一段時間，你睇到 CCP 即係中國共產黨喺澳洲當地嘅滲透係透過咩方式嚟到進行，同埋個影響有幾大咧？
好啊，多謝張劍華，係啊，多謝關總成。咁我喺澳洲生活咗2年半，咁我即係不斷從事嘅政治工作裏邊咧， 其實係感受到即係共產黨喺海外嗰種存在，同埋持續喺社區裏邊啦，喺個人層面啦，都會同我哋即係繼續發聲高調，為香港民主自由講説話嘅人咧，會持續有啲張力嘅。咁我自己最直接嘅睇到幾方面啦。嗱，如果我哋做政治人物或者做倡議嘅組織咧，佢唔容易，即係好似喺香港咁安插咗一啲人喺你身邊，跟住收情報組織，跟住影響你做啲嘢，佢唔容易嘅，因為我哋大家都識得大家，咁大家都清楚大家啲背景，同埋我哋19年之後嚟到海外嘅香港人都會更加小心啦，知道即係中共嘅手法。最直接嘅我見到就係透過一個多元文化作為一個即係一啲機構嘅背景，因為澳洲都係一個移民國家啦，政府本身都有啲係多元文化嘅委員會，無論喺地區嘅層面，或者係喺州嘅層面、聯邦層面，都會有一啲委員會啊，政府都會有啲資助，咁啊叫啲人入去坐喺委員會裏面講下啲意見啦。咁你睇到代表中國嗰個移民嗰啲人，我哋入去咧，我係感受到，因為我嘅身份好容易知道啦，我係感受到受敵視嘅。咁譬如一啲多元文化嘅晚會咧，咁佢請大家食飯啊，互相交流下文化語言等等啦。我曾經試過係參加一個多元文化嘅晚會，有官方背景嘅晚會，跟住有中國嘅代表同翻主辦單位講：喂，許智峰踢佢係個逃犯嚟㗎，係個罪犯嚟㗎，點解會請佢㗎？咁我相信，即係如果係去到社區層面嘅呢一啲晚宴，如果唔係受到即係中共喺背後嘅一啲嘅煽動啦，或者組織或者提供情報啦，或者嘗試影響嗰啲委員會嘅人啦，佢唔會咁輕易喺一個應該互相尊重嘅文化裏邊講得出話許智峰係一個逃犯，一個罪犯嚟嘅，唔應該邀請等等。咁所以你見到，如果我係對我係有呢種立場嘅話咧，咁對爭取香港民主自由啊、示威嗰啲人啊、嗰啲龍頭組織啊、地區嗰啲香港人組織，其實我相信佢哋都係持好相似嘅立場，喺背後做咗好多功夫。呢個第一個見到啦。第二就我見到喺選舉層面啦，我見到有中方背景嘅，即係華人背景啦，係大陸出世或者係大陸人嘅二代去參選，去到最低地區嘅層次，區議會嘅層次，即係澳洲嘅區議會層次。已經見到佢哋好經常會同領事館，即係澳洲駐亞德萊德嘅領事館啦，走埋一齊食飯。咁佢啲好高檔嘅場所食飯。咁喺啲大型嘅晚宴裏邊咧，佢哋係會坐主家席嘅。咁當然有其他議員啦。咁但係未會坐喺主家席，甚至喺總領事身邊。佢哋係同一夥人嚟。咁我自己好深深感受到，咁喺選舉裏邊，即係點樣動員啲中國留學生啊，去拉票啊。咁其實你見到呢啲華人面孔，好多時都會係我相信啊，我冇實質嘅證據啊，係受到唔同程度嘅資助，去到選舉，係中共喺背後透過呢啲人去影響當地嘅選情，同埋安插自己啲人喺身邊。咁第三就係我見到係商會啦，因為大陸人或者中國人喺澳洲做生意嘅，即係比較多嘅，比起香港人，我哋即係專業人士比較多啲。佢哋做生意開唔同嘅餐館啊、移民中介啊等等。咁商會嘅佢哋人數多，商會嘅同領事嘅關係咧係千絲萬縷。咁我所知道佢哋會請得喐一啲重要啲嘅，譬如州長啦，甚至我見過佢哋請得喐外長啦，去到佢哋嘅國慶，即係中國嘅國慶。就會請到呢啲重要人物嚟到支持佢哋發言啊等等，咁透過呢啲嘅組織去散播佢哋自己嘅意識形態，同埋反對我哋呢啲香港爭取民主自由嘅人，我見到滲透嘅會喺呢幾個方面出現咯。
其實頭先你講到咧，即係佢哋參選啊，我對呢個問題比較有興趣就係，即係參選基本上佢都有啲比較嚴格嘅選舉規定，譬如佢收受咗啲捐款啊，選舉經費應該有一高度透明度㗎。如果佢真係收受到好多來自共產黨或者話關係人物嘅一啲捐款嘅話，咁呢啲係唔係都有一啲好公開嘅即係資訊可以證明到嘅咧？
我暫時觀察到嘅佢哋咧，唔係透過資助參選，佢哋係 去發動佢哋中國留學生同埋好多商鋪去到譬如呢度係容許郵寄選舉嘅，去到幫手做登記，咁可以合法㗎。但我見到非法嘅行為嘅，我見到佢哋係會叫做一個中國留學生，你幫我登記做選民啦，跟住郵寄俾你嗰張選票，你俾我幫你處理得㗎啦。咁呢個係我親身經歷過見到嘅，亦都親身聽過有證人去講啲事。咁我都相信，咁我嘅參與其中啦。不過有啲司法程序我唔可以太公開講住。咁我相信咧就係一個地區嘅層面嘅啫。咁我相信遲啲大家會見到有一啲檢控嘅個案，咁係冰山一角嘅。咁但係就算檢控到呢班，未必捉到個龍頭啦，未必證實到係領事館做啦。咁但係如果連最低嘅區議會層次都係滲透到係呢個情況嘅話，你想象到州嘅層次同聯邦嘅層次，我相信可以佢哋做嘅投放嘅資源會更多咯。
OK，交俾阿 Gracia 做一個好簡單嘅總結啊嘛。
Sure. So just now Ted outlined his experience in Australia. So he's been in Australia for 2.5 years, and he has seen quite a lot of different kinds of infiltration in Australia. For example, making use of government committees or committees that are associated with the government that's there to encourage inclusion, to like diversity, and they make use of those a community to spread their own narrative, and at the same time also see the mobilization of Chinese students and overseas Chinese to carry out certain goals. And then there are marginally legal activities like helping other people to register voters and encourage them to send them their ballots to vote on behalf of them. And also there is the actor like the business chambers who were very influential in the local community because of the business interests that they represent in a way. And so Ted has outlined these three factors. And now I would like to ask Sam to give us some input on another very influential actor all over the world, not only in Australia or in the UK, but they're all over the world, the Confucius Institution. So can you, I know that you recently wrote a report that's very comprehensive on the influence or how do they operate. So can you please give us a very brief outline or summary of what you found in your report? And can you please access how good are they infiltrating the community that you have looked into? Thank you very much.
Sure, yeah, thank you. I want to say first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's always a privilege to share a platform with people who have made sacrifices for the cause of freedom, and I just want to applaud. I think this is a great platform for discussion. I'm very glad to be here. So I'm the director of UK-China Transparency. We are a new charity. We were set up this year, and our aim is to produce research and promote education and promote transparency on ties between the UK and China. Previous to that, I was working, and I still do work, as a freelance researcher and writer on China, on Chinese issues. And that's how I first encountered the issue of Confucius Institute. So last year, myself and an author from a researcher from Hong Kong, Anson Kwong, wrote a report for the Henry Jackson Society, which is a think tank here in the UK, on Confucius Institutes. So that was last year. We essentially wanted to do a really in-depth investigation of the activities of all these institutes. We wanted to interrogate the idea that it's just language and culture. Often the defense of Confucius Institutes made by those who are supporting the program, by the Chinese government, is that these are just language and culture centers. The only aim is to teach Mandarin and to introduce people to Chinese culture, right? And I think that's a good defense in a way, because these are quite unobjectionable in many ways, unobjectionable things. I mean, in some respects, you could say an institute which essentially answers to the Chinese government shouldn't be teaching us about Chinese culture. We should have other people as well. But essentially, it's a good defense because it's difficult to object really strongly to something that is just teaching language and culture. But we wanted to interrogate that claim that it is just language and culture. So you can read our investigation online. It ended up being something like 20,000 words, which was about twice as long as it should have been. There are 30 Confucius Institutes in the UK. We wanted to look at them in depth. Each institute is a partnership between a Chinese PRC entity on the one hand and a British university on the other hand. Usually the Chinese PRC entity is university too, but in a couple of cases it's, say, I mean, there's one case in Oxford here in the UK where the PRC partner is a publishing house run by the propaganda department of the CCP. But we did this in-depth investigation and we found out that, after all, it's not just language and culture. We found instances of Confucius Institutes being involved in essentially pseudo-political work. There's an institute in London, London South Bank University, that was running events in the House of Lords. We found institutes that were involved in creating platforms for scientific, technical cooperation between the two partner organizations, one in the UK that was hosting it and the partner organization in China, promoting the university in the UK that was hosting the institute to Chinese students. So basically marketing for the university. And indeed, this is a big theme. We found a lot of Confucius Institutes that were being essentially used by the British university as a platform for commercial interests in China. This is a very big theme in the higher education sector in the UK, with government regulators now talking about dependence on Chinese students. So universities were using this node, this Confucius Institute, in some cases to build that dependency, to build the market share, to get more Chinese students, get more money in. So we found a whole range of stuff that was, as it were, not what Confucius Institutes are supposed to be about. And some of this stuff was quite worrying. For example, take cooperation, promoting cooperation in scientific areas that are potentially sensitive areas of research. It's one kind of cooperation that you could say is not necessarily the kind of technical collaboration that we should be doing with Chinese institutes. And so there were a variety of areas like that where what we found was very much not in keeping with the stated mission of Confucius Institutes. And so that all happened, and there was quite a fuss about this in the public sphere, and the debate started. Now, earlier this year, myself and two others set up UK-China Transparency, the charity which I now run. And we wanted to return to one of the issues that had emerged from the initial research for the other think tank, the Henry Jackson Society. And this was the question of whether Confucius Institutes are actually legal at all. And this actually is directly related to some of the key questions about infiltration. So we did when I say we, I mean UK-China Transparency, we did a report on the legality of Confucius Institutes, the relationship of what they are and what they are doing to British law, to the obligations of universities, of which these Confucius Institutes are part. And we have a range of findings. You can read all about this on our website. We published hundreds of pages of documents in support of our findings. One of our USPs is that we want to publish all the data. Anything we say, we publish our evidence. And we want to build a big digital library of documents related to UK and China. But one of our key findings was that as of 2 or 3 years ago, this has been rolled out in China, a new set of regulations about the circumstances under which Chinese citizens who work in Chinese universities can go abroad to take part to work at Confucius Institutes in the UK, in Australia, in the US. As you say, these things are everywhere. So this was the rollout in China of a new set of standardized rules about recruitment of teachers to go into Confucius Institutes worldwide. And what we found was that one of the criteria for recruitment, one of the things on which applicants are judged for their suitability to go and work in Confucius Institutes around the world, is their ability to comply with Chinese Communist Party guidelines on discipline in foreign affairs, and essentially their ability to do the CCP's work while abroad. This is written into the regulations. And this is incredibly worrying. Obviously, universities should be a place where people can discuss things freely. This is the whole point of a university. It's a place where people can have intellectual discussions that are wide-ranging, not subject to external political control. But also in the UK, that is written into law. Now more than ever, we've just had a new piece of legislation, the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, which strengthens the obligations of universities to ensure their campuses are a place where everyone has freedom of speech and academic freedom, and indeed strengthening the powers of the regulator to make sure universities fulfill those obligations. So if you are systematically accepting workers to come into your university who have been selected on the basis of their ability to undermine the very values that you as a university are obliged legally to uphold, well, you have a huge issue actually on your hands. So look, I mean, Rishi Sunak promised to ban Confucius Institutes when he was running to be leader of the Conservative Party. That hasn't happened, but the story's not over yet. I think our research, and there are others working in this area, speaks for itself. I should probably stop speaking a moment and let you and let the discussion move on. I'm sure we're going to get onto the issues of the ban and etc. But that's just an introduction to my work on this issue and to who we are and what we do.
Albert, you're muted.
Oh, he's still muted. Is he?
You're muted.
I think we're just having a minor technical issue, and I'm just going to ensure this is sorted out quickly.
Yeah, OK。
Oh, there we go.
OK， 唔該晒嚇，咁多謝阿 Sam 嘅介紹啦嚇。咁就阿 Sam 咧就其實係一個 NGO 嘅成員嚟㗎，佢而家有一個叫做 UK and China Transparency 嘅機構啦。舊年咧發表咗一個 report 嘅，就講到即係個題目咧叫係咪孔子學院是否合法嘅咧咁講。咁佢頭先咧講咗一啲即係關於佢見到孔子學院喺英國嘅一啲情況啦。佢亦都講到呢啲情況都似乎唔係淨係英國㗎啦啊。咁我諗大家都聽過下，我哋有部分包括咗利用孔子學院同好多大學結盟，咁咧實際上係扮演緊一個學術機構嘅咁嘅身份，但係實際上咧就從事緊一啲即係國家宣傳嘅工作，以推廣文化語言為名咧，實際上進行一啲所謂政治上嘅影響嘅啊。咁喺過程裏邊咧，佢都講到啦，即係佢哋甚至咧同一啲商業利益，以至一啲科研啊同科技相關嘅一啲工作咧，都有份參與嘅。喺個過程裏邊咧，孔子學院嗰啲教師咧，名義上就係公開招聘啦，但實際上咧係有個清楚嘅guideline或者要求啦，要佢哋咧係服從共產黨嘅一啲guideline嘅。咁所以咧，某種程度上，我相信阿 Sam 嘅意思就係呢班孔子學院嘅教職員啦，係有某種程度國家代理人嘅身份，咁就以孔子學院教師嘅名義咧喺英國呢邊咧係從事緊一啲唔合適嘅工作，咁亦都同喺英國呢邊對大學啊、大專院校啊、文化界嗰種所謂開放討論啊呢啲咁嘅精神咧係相違背嘅。咁所以呢個就係阿 Sam Dunning 講嘅大致內容。咁我哋遲啲將段片放上 YouTube 嗰陣時咧係會有中文字幕嘅，大家唔使擔心啊。咁啊打成條筋上啦。咁我就頭先聽完阿許智峰，亦都聽完阿 Sam 講到澳洲同埋英國嘅情況啦。咁我亦都想了解下啦，情況就似乎有一啲我哋都約略都知道。咁經過兩位介紹之後更加清楚啦。或者許智峰可以講一講，其實你覺得而家喺澳洲嗰邊啊，究竟而家應對中國即係嗰個滲透情況咧？做得夠唔夠，同埋有啲咩可以改善咧？因為大家好多人都講噶啦，澳洲同加拿大咧就係共產黨滲透嘅兩個重災區嚟嘅啊。咁你在重災區啊，你喺重災區啊，你覺得而家喺 澳洲佢哋嘅處理方式、應對方式夠唔夠，同有咩可以做咧？
嗱，我自己咧，嚟咗時間唔係好長，不過我喺澳洲呢段時間裏邊，我都慢慢越嚟越感受到咧，即民眾同埋政府開始有啲醒覺嘅。即係我諗，如果你問澳洲，可能喺唔好話10年前、5年前，佢可能民眾同埋政府都覺得中國係一個友好嘅國家，係覺得要友善一齊合作嘅國家。咁但係可能到呢一刻，我諗民眾同政府都會覺得唔係咁樣噶啦，即係中國係一種威脅嚟嘅，中國係一種慢慢滲透影響緊我哋國家嘅價值啊、自由嘅一種威脅。喺意識形態上咧，其實係做到噶啦。咁但係實際上有一啲經濟上、貿易上，佢哋合作嘅空間，佢哋冇辦法一口氣或者完全即係可以斬釘截鐵咁樣同佢哋冇接觸、冇合作。咁維持呢啲接觸、維持呢啲合作嘅時候咧，佢哋嗰種對抗呢啲滲透嘅力量，可能唔係一時三刻可以完全可以企得好硬。我俾個例子就係話，譬如我早年嚟到嗰陣，我見到頭先我提到啦，外長係會出席一啲中國嘅大商會嘅國慶活動嘅中國國慶活動。咁我同一時間我就會我都試過公開質疑啦。咁如果我作為一個被通緝嘅，即係爭取民主自由而被通緝嘅意見人士啦，喺中國嚟講，如果我代表住嘅一班香港人、一啲組織、專業團體或者組織都好，我又請外長去到一個場合，你係咪都會嚟咧？咁我覺得喺呢啲嘅外交嘅禮節又好，或者係一啲手段都好啦，我覺得佢哋未處理得好好嘅。佢即係大家都係民間身份嚟嘅啫，即係一個商會都係民間身份，唔係官方機構嚟嘅。咁如果去翻官方同官方之間嗰個就更加難做。過往我哋好留意州長啦，或者教部長級嘅官員啦，當佢哋需要行入中國領事館去參與任何嘅活動咧，我哋好銳意要俾佢哋知道，事前知道，或者當刻喺領事館門口做抗議。我哋要俾澳洲嘅官員知道，佢哋行得入呢個領事館係一個恥辱嚟嘅，又俾我哋係咁鬧，因為你同緊一個即係國際上大家都人所共知侵犯人權嘅獨裁者，你同佢打交道。咁但係我見到好多特別喺州嘅層次啦，因為佢唔係處理外交事務噶嘛，唔係處理即係國防事務，佢只係處理自己個州嗰個經濟，佢會忍住呢啲嘅批評，照行入去同佢握手，照去做呢啲嘅咁嘅同佢做交易。咁喺呢啲州嘅層次咧，你見到好多嘅，譬如我哋都聽到一啲州嘅澳洲嘅海港啦，成個可以賣咗出去，或者長期好平價租出去都好。咁我哋見過喺州嘅層次有一帶一路嘅嗰啲貿易協議啦，簽咗，最後喺聯邦層次都彈翻轉頭。咁我覺得唔係主事國防外交嘅官員。喺州嘅情況或者喺地區嘅情況咧，就更加容易跌咗落去呢啲引誘又好啦，或者佢哋會忍受，佢知道你唔係朋友噶啦，但係佢會忍受，因為佢繼續要呢啲生意啊嘛。咁特別係我哋喺西澳啦，喺澳洲就見到啦，即係好多嘅產業同中國係最佳拍檔嚟嘅。咁佢哋甚至會同中國係會更加有一個默契，更加關係緊密，更加係一個良好嘅營商環境，佢哋係更加關注，咁就放輕咗人權嗰度。咁我覺得喺呢啲情況上面，佢哋未必跟得上。原來你同佢咁緊密嘅時候，佢背後已經做緊好多動員啊、文化、語言啊，喺大學裏邊做緊滲透組織工作，因為你俾佢存在啊嘛。咁所以我覺得意識形態上面佢哋係知道，咁但係喺實際操作上面，好多時政府或者係州嘅層次，佢哋係跟唔上，即係反滲透嗰種步伐咯。
咁你覺得有啲咩再可以做多啲咧？
我覺得要時間嘅，當然係，因為一個譬如喺澳洲或者喺我哋美國、加拿大等等喺聯邦制國家裏邊，就好容易喺 地區或者州嘅層次就係自己土皇帝㗎啦，咁未必可以跟得上成個國家嘅外交政策。咁當然，如果可以有啲嘢可以係喺中央層次、聯邦層次由上而下係得嘅。咁譬如已經通過咗制裁法案啦。咁當然我唔期待好現實地澳洲會好快提出制裁啦。咁但係點樣用聯邦嘅法例去到例如喺澳洲維多利亞州簽完一帶一路嘅貿易協議之後，點樣用一個由上而下話翻俾地區嘅官員知道，咁樣做係影響咗國家利益嘅，咁樣做係泄露咗一啲機密嘅。譬如點樣我哋見到澳洲都好熱烈討論，係咪要禁微信啦，係咪要禁 TikTok 啦等等，呢啲滲透工具似乎越嚟越多人知道啦。咁但係下低嘅官員可能同你講，喂，佢哋商會啊，佢哋嘅反對聲音好強。如果呢一次我禁晒佢哋嘅話咧，我成個大陸嘅板塊都會同你打仗啊咁樣。咁但係要俾佢知道，有可能有需要一啲係全國嘅法例，從上而下。咁當然要說服到民眾，咁先至說服到下面嘅官員。咁喺呢啲張力裏邊，我覺得要啲時間去慢慢將一啲更加強硬嘅措施去落實喺全個即係無論係州同埋地區嘅層次咯，唔係淨係留喺聯邦嘅層次咯。咁可能要用法律啦，可能要用教育啦，同埋要用啲時間去慢慢再改變人嘅思想。
頭先你講咧，都係一啲即係你覺得喺國家啊、政府層次可以做啦。咁我哋一個關心就係作為普通一個平民，特別係海外澳洲嘅香港人咁樣，你覺得即係面對住中共嘅滲透啊，好多人話集會俾人影相啊咁樣啊，你覺得或者話喺中國你面對佢咁龐大嘅經濟影響力啊，咁你覺得平民作為一個普通人有啲咩嘢或者邊幾方面工作可以做，去能夠去應對呢一種無所不在嘅滲透咧？
我覺得好多嘢唔係個人可以好高調，即係唔係個個好似我咁啦，已經俾人通緝緊唔怕啦。咁就算唔係講緊政治倡議啊、游說啊等等呢啲咁政治嘅工作，但係就算好基本嘅公民社會工作咧，香港人都好多恐懼，未必夠膽做。咁但係譬如我哋見到其中一種滲透就係好多共產黨或者呢度嘅中國領事館千絲萬縷嘅語文學校，咁裏邊透過教普通話啦，咁就霸咗喺呢度嘅中國語文教育嘅一個職位。咁但係我哋都要好努力，我見到好多香港人好努力，話俾呢度政府聽，講普通話同埋寫共產黨嗰隻簡體字，唔係代表晒成個華人傳統噶。咁好多譬如台灣啊、香港啊嘅語文學校咧，係慢慢組織緊起嚟，咁話翻俾佢哋聽，無論喺語言同埋文化上面話翻俾政府聽，喂，我哋係香港人嘅華人，香港嚟嘅華人，我哋同大陸嗰個族群同共產黨底下所可以動員到嗰啲人係唔同嘅價值，係唔同嘅文化、唔同嘅語言嘅。咁我覺得譬如呢啲層次，普通嘅香港家庭或者移民都好，係可以參與嘅。即係點樣喺社區之間，喺多元文化嘅嗰個背景裏邊，或者頭先我提到一啲政府委員會裏邊，同大家講，我哋係同中國嚟嗰種華人係另一個群族嚟嘅，係另一種文化嚟嘅。我諗久而久之會影響到佢哋。如果大家都有呢種自覺，有呢種意識嘅話，呢個係需要慢慢要用啲時間去做。但係大家都要香港人喺海外要擔起呢種角色，話俾人聽嗰個分別。
好，多謝晒許聰。
Just now, Ted has again shared some of his experience and his observations. Like, he did see a change of attitude or mindset towards China and Australia in general. But policy or actions, especially coming from the local authorities, haven't caught up. So they are still doing a lot of engagement, despite Ted and many other Hong Kongers who try to publicly shame them. These kind of engagement are driven by economic interest and trying to make business. And at the same time, it's very hard to 100% decouple from China or just completely disregard China as a very powerful actor in the world. And then Albert asked about like what kind of things can be done to address these problems. Ted said that there are a lot of discussions about laws and different topics, like if WeChat or TikTok should be banned, as they are playing a huge part in infiltration or spreading the CCP's narrative. And but the willingness of the local authorities to follow suit or to really adopt these kind of laws very low, because they anticipate quite a lot of pushback from the very prominent actors that Ted has addressed earlier, which are the chambers, the Chinese students, and the overseas Chinese community. But as an overseas Hong Kongers, there are a lot of things that we can still do. Like, not everyone has to be like Ted, like have a bounty on him, or like being a very high-profile political activist. But many Hong Kongers in Australia have been protesting against the dominance of these Chinese mouthpiece, let's put it that way, that are proposing as representatives that represent the whole Chinese culture. So they're trying, especially in the scope of language. So Ted said there are many Hong Kongers who are trying to convey the message that Chinese culture under like the CCP United Front Black umbrella cannot represent all ethnic Chinese. And there's like a lot of different parts of the culture that other groups can represent. And this is something he is encouraging a lot of Hong Kongers to do. So on that note, I want to come back to Sam. What do you think the UK, we were talking about the UK, so now Rishi Sunak is saying, oh, banning Confucius Institution is disproportionate and unnecessary, according to him, after promising that he'll do that. What can we do? Like, what can legislators do? What can the UK government do? What can activists like me, I do? Or what can overseas Hong Kongers do? Or what can ordinary British citizens do? Like, how do we deal with the problem right now if, like as you said, there is a serious risk of infiltration, or it's not even a risk, it's a reality right now? Like, what can we do?
Well, I think it's a difficult question to answer in some ways, because this is a big phenomenon. The political will to tackle it head on is clearly not there. I mean, this is in a way a classic example of a U-turn, where someone has wanted to appear tough for the leadership contest, which is obviously the voters in that, or lost the vote, but the people deciding who's in charge within the Conservative Party are very hawkish, as it were, on China, tough on the CCP, etc. But once you get into office, all of a sudden it's much more complicated, etc. I mean, I think a good way to answer your question is to explain what we're trying to do. So we did this study arguing that Confucius Institutes are illegal in May. Now, that process is not over. So this autumn, we are going to launch a campaign to essentially pressurize the regulator to take action. There is upcoming research on other issues that are related. CSSAs, Chinese Student and Scholars Associations. You'll have to excuse me, I don't speak Cantonese, and thank you for translating. But these are the 中国学生学者联合, I think, for those who are not familiar with the English term, where I believe some similar findings will be revealed about their connection to the embassy and to the Chinese state. And there'll be some other research, by the way, on lots of other matters that are coming out this autumn. The uniting theme, which is essentially my answer to this question, is that much of what the CCP is doing in the UK, and I expect the situation is the same in Australia, and perhaps here we can learn from one another, but much of what is being done is illegal already. What there is not is the proof. So in the Confucius Institute's instance, the mission, as it were, was to, if the thesis is that these things shouldn't be allowed because they're against the rules, let's find the evidence. We found the evidence. We found the regulations the Chinese government has about how these people are selected and what they're obliged to do. Once you have the evidence, make the argument and try and win that argument. It's the same with CSSAs. Everyone knows, right? I'm not saying it's true, but everyone knows these things are controlled by the Chinese embassy. They're part of the United Front apparatus, essentially an arm of the Chinese state in some respects. Where's the proof? The proof has to be found. Once you have the proof, well, then you can relate the facts to the existing rules. And as it happens, if you are a student society at a university in the UK, you have signed up to rules and regulations, just in the same way that the universities have obligations to protect freedom of speech, and the Confucius Institutes are a systemic risk to that should not be allowed to exist. In just the same way, the CSSAs pretend to be student societies that are independently run and that don't do anything wrong, but actually they are, and there is proof, controlled by the Chinese state. And if that is the case, well, they have lied to the universities and to the student unions, which they are registered societies of, and they are breaking rules. So the theme here is that we already have rules. And if you look for the evidence, if you translate the evidence, this is so important, just translating what's out there in Mandarin, well, then you can make a case, almost in a legal respect. What is going on is already against rules that have been in place for a long time. We may not need new rules. If this CSSA says it's controlled by the embassy, but has told the student union, of which it's part, that it's independently run, that it's democratically run, well, it shouldn't be allowed. As it happens, the universities who've investigated this issue have forced their CSSAs to be disaffiliated from the student union because they've done the investigation. Is the CSSA really independent? No. So this kind of ties into what can Hong Kongers do as well. It's so important to look at the things that you guys take for granted, right? You take for granted that something like a CSSA is related to the Chinese embassy, related to the United Front Work Department, actually subordinate to the CCP. But to find and translate and present the evidence and then relate that to the actual rules in the UK, in Australia, wherever it is. And I really do think we can, there's a lot of information sharing to be done here. I've spoken about the study we did on Confucius Institutes and our finding that the way the staff are hired and managed is a systemic threat to universities. We also found that the way they are hired is illegal under British law. It's so discriminatory. You can't be such and such an age. Oh, you have to tell us whether you're a Uyghur, or you have to be evaluated on your politics. This stuff is illegal in the UK. So if people are coming to work in British universities who've been hired in that way, that has legal ramifications for the university. The point is, a lot of what we found in our study of Confucius Institutes is also going to be relevant to other countries, because this is global. They've standardized the way that people are sent to Confucius Institutes from China. So Australia has equality laws. Australia, I'm no expert, will have laws on universities' responsibilities to protect freedom of speech. I don't know what they are in Australia's case. Canada, the same. The US, the same. No one has systematically translated the Mandarin material, built up a picture of the reality of these institutes or CSSAs or whatever, and compared this to the rules that already exist. And I think there's really a big opportunity here for a collaborative effort to do that. Almost at a grassroots level, this stuff has to be done to make a change and to point out that, look, CSSAs, Confucius Institutes, we can move on to talk about United Front groups, as well. The things they are doing are already against our rules, and we should enforce our own rules, right? So that's, sorry, a slightly long-winded answer to your question, but I hope it is an answer.
Yeah, I think it's a really good answer, and it completely stopped me from being the devil advocate and said, but I'm just an ordinary British citizen who want to learn the language. But as you can say, these things or these practices are legal. There's no room or no maneuver or no space or maneuver for them to say, oh, this is actually acceptable in any sense. So I have no further follow-up, and thank you very much for sharing that. And on to you again, Elder.
Okay, but I would like to raise a question for Sam before I go to translate the main theme he spoke. As we all know, the PM, before his election to be the PM, he promised to ban all Confucius Institute in UK. But now he is eating up his word. How do you feel about that? Do you think this is inevitable that when someone is elected, when someone is in the position, he is facing a lot of constraint in exercising what he had promised to the people?
I think you've got to look at the specific timeline of what happened. So he made this promise when he was running to be Conservative leader, came the first time when he lost, right? Unless I'm forgetting.
Yeah.
Liz Truss became leader. Something happened. She's no longer leader. He is the leader. And he went back on this promise and said, we're not going to ban them. Okay. First key question is, how would he have instituted a ban? Well, based on my understanding, there would have been no way to force universities, which are independent from government, right, in the UK, unlike in China, to force universities to get rid of all their Confucius institutes. This would have had to be new legislation that would go through the Commons and the whole political process here. And I think part of the calculation he made was, that's a waste of my time in terms of the legislative backlog. I mean, there's a huge amount of legislation to be passed, but also it's a very small thing for a new leader wants to make an impact to focus on in legislative terms. You know, Confucius Institutes are, I don't know if you can see me, I can't see myself all of a sudden, but Confucius Institutes are important for all of us, all of you guys, and they are important for universities. You know, this is a really key issue in my opinion. But in the broader scheme of, I'm a new prime minister, I can't get rid of these things except through legislation, which I think is potentially the case. Do I really want to focus on this now? Okay, so that's one aspect. The other aspect is, I think he got in, and the people who work at the Foreign Office, which is Britain's Foreign Affairs Ministry, said, no, do not ban Confucius Institutes. What will happen, I'm just saying what they would have said, in my opinion, is that the Chinese will ban the British Council. The CCP strategic narrative publicly has always been, Confucius Institutes are just like the British Council, just like the Institut Français, just like the Goethe Institute. You know, this is just another harmless, innocent language and culture program. If you ban Confucius Institutes in the UK, we will ban the British Council in China. And there was this fear of retribution. And then third, the broader question of how it might impact other areas of the relationship with China, which, you know, I think Ted has talked about this in the context of Australia. Trade is important. China is an important trading partner from the UK, so on and so forth. So I think the incentives for him to follow through with this promised ban were very small, and the incentives to not ban them and to let the program continue, but probably to scrutinize it a little bit more carefully, you know, from a security standpoint, were still there, and I think that may be doing done. But the final thing I'll add is that this new piece of legislation came through at roughly a similar time. This is the Higher Education Freedom of Speech Act, which so greatly strengthens the regulator at universities' responsibilities to deal with threats to freedom of speech of this kind. I don't know whether there was anyone in government who thought, you know, let's, as it were, leave this Confucius Institutes issue to the regulator, leave it to universities, let it be decided and worked out at different universities at a more grassroots level. We're not going to intervene. That is certainly what I think could happen now, given the evidence we will be presenting to the regulator. I'm meeting with the director for freedom of speech at the regulator later this month to discuss this issue. And as I said, there's a lot more that will be happening in the autumn around this, including that we will be launching a campaign for the regulator to essentially take responsibility and fulfill its obligations to actually examine these issues. So it's sort of there were no incentives, I don't think, for Rishi to actually carry through with this promise, but the story is not over yet. I think we will be hearing more about this in the next 6 months or so.
好啊，唔該晒啊 ，thank you so much Sam。我簡單咁 summarize 幾句啦。咁啊 Sam 嘅睇法咧就係，即係個 situation， 即係孔子學院喺英國嘅一啲不規範行為咧，其實佢覺得好多人都知㗎。不過問題就係，即係喺作出一種政治姿態同埋一個政府，當佢係在其位嗰陣時啦，喺處理上就有啲比較複雜嘅因素要考慮。咁呢個第一點啦。咁佢都係堅持咧，孔子學院而家好嘅工作喺英國好多嘅行為咧都係非法嘅。咁所以佢哋會繼續係推行一啲 campaign 啦，就希望公眾關注呢件事，亦都推動更加強烈嘅反應，希望處理個問題咁樣啦。佢哋準備喺好快將來咧，亦都會處理另一個相關問題，就係提出一個叫 CSSA 啊。CSSA 咧就唔係綜援喎就係呢個即係一個叫中國學生學者聯會嘅組織。咁呢個組織咧，佢亦都留意到啦，實際上係俾呢個中國嘅領事館控制住，亦都係 stick to 即係中國共產黨嘅一啲要求嚟做嘢㗎。咁佢覺得咧，就呢個組織咧，亦都係透過各種方法，譬如成為咗學生會嘅一啲正式嘅代表啦。咁咧，其實亦都係影響緊喺英國嘅學術機構啊，或者話因為佢哋同學校掛鈎啦嘅一啲操作嘅。咁佢亦都覺得呢個問題咧係需要正視，所以佢哋喺好短期之內咧就會進行第二次嘅更加深入嘅 study 同埋 campaign 咧，就係關注呢個 CSSA 嘅操作同埋問題嘅咁佢覺得咧就即係個問題係相當之複雜，咁所以咧係需要佢哋繼續去宣傳，佢哋都唔會放棄啦。咁我就問佢，即係喺英國首相喺上任之前咧，曾經講過就會即係取消所有喺英國嘅孔子學院㗎。點解上咗位做咗首相之後就好似食言咁樣啊？咁啊 Sam 咧都俾咗個簡單嘅即係講法，簡單講咧就係話，佢話第一，因為即係個情況即係當佢係做呢個選舉嗰陣時同佢上到喺面對問題有啲唔同啦，所以亦都比較複雜。咁第一咧就係佢覺得第一個問題就係，如果即係中國政府一路都講孔子學院嘅身份係等於英國文化協會，咁如果一旦即係禁止孔子學院嘅話咧，就可能會令到中國採取相應嘅報復行動咁樣啦。咁另外咧，亦都涉及一啲其他嘅問題，包括咗咧，仲有一啲商業同埋貿易嘅利益啦。亦都有個問題咧，就係政府咧喺呢度咧就唔可以話指示啲大學去取消孔子學院嘅，因為孔子學院係大學同埋呢個中國相關嘅機構嗰啲協定嚟㗎咁所以問題咧比較複雜咁樣啦。咁呢個就解釋咗點解英國首相咧係冇實踐到佢嘅諾言咁時間關係啦，我哋仲有少少時間，我最後咧希望兩位好簡單咁講一講。頭先兩位都簡單介紹咗，即係中共喺英國喺澳洲嘅一啲用唔同方式嘅滲透情況，亦都講過一啲應對方法啦。咁或者想先請阿許智峰啦，你可以講講你預計即係中國而家經濟出現困難啦，但係佢嗰種政治上嘅強勢啦，係冇收斂到㗎，所謂戰狼外交。咁簡單講，你覺得未來一段短時間之內，1年2年之間，中共喺澳洲嘅滲透工作會有啲咩嘢，即係值得大家留意嘅咧？有咩發展嘅勢頭係值得特別注意嘅咧？
嗱，我覺得中國喺澳洲啦，或者全世界嗰種滲透咧，佢自己都會遇到一定嘅困難。咁因為開始民心係反中嘅，好多時都知道中國對自己本土嘅文化價值係受影響嘅。不過我覺得我哋要睇清同埋接受咧，其實譬如話作為一個香港人啦，或者香港人組織啦、游說組織都好，我哋所做嘅功夫咧係細水長流，但係唔對等嘅。咩叫唔對等咧？就係我哋幾努力都好，佢哋係國家機器嚟嘅。我哋幾努力約見官員做游說都好，佢有個領事館喺度，佢對住佢有國家嘅資源喺度。咁我哋有 我哋嘅香港人喺度，但係佢哋人數仲多，咁我哋要諗諗我哋嘅優勢係啲乜嘢？可能對香港人組織嚟講，我哋嘅優勢就係我哋做生意冇佢哋咁多人咁多或者咁叻。但係我哋多啲專業人士喺度，咁我哋可唔可以喺啲專業領域裏邊發展咧？可唔可以即係譬如我哋其中一個點解即係我想努力去到做法律界嘅原因就係點解我哋唔可以喺專業領域裏邊喺律師公會本地嘅律師公會裏邊喺俾香港人佔一席位？我相信我哋嘅專業人士比佢多，咁呢啲係我哋嘅優勢嚟。我哋冇一個領事館背後即係國家機器嘅資源，但係香港人有嘅資本係多，香港人識得用呢啲資本係用得好。咁我哋點樣可以用我哋嘅優勢嚟即係擴大我哋嘅組織同埋我哋嘅網絡同我哋嘅資源，去嘗試同一個國家機器去抗衡，俾呢度嘅即係即係官員知道，喂，你要對住中共嘅領事館要下氣氣，因為佢哋有影響力。我哋香港人都係同樣有即係唔好話可以比得上，但係接近嘅影響力。咁呢啲全部都係民間嘅工作嚟。咁所以要接受同要承認呢個係唔對等嘅一個競賽，但係我哋要細水長流嘅功夫去將呢個距離拉近。咁我覺得如果我哋我見到香港人係向呢個方向發展緊。如果我哋做呢個距離拉近嘅時候，我覺得未來中共可以做嘅滲透工作，其實佢會更加遇到困難嘅。佢會見到我哋更加多，我哋喺語言文化專業領域上面都佔一席位嘅時候，呢個就係我哋可以抗衡呢種民間抗衡呢種國家機器嘅一種滲透。但係我哋要承認咗先，我哋淨係抗議話外長成日同中國咁友好啊，嗰啲冇用，因為佢哋係不能抗拒，即係要維持國家嘅經濟啊穩定啊等等。佢哋甚至知道你係敵人，都係要不能抗拒嘅滲透嚟嘅。咁我哋可以即係點樣阻止呢種滲透？就係要香港人喺民間嘅點樣變得更加強大。咁所以我嘅預計就係佢唔會好輕易去做到。佢自己中國即係共產黨經濟都係疲弱嘅時候，當澳洲啊國際都冇需要即係再減退對中國嘅依賴之後，咁我哋香港人嘅民間網絡即係公民社會再強大嘅時候，我覺得各種因素加埋係會令到中國困難重重。雖然呢個係一個樂觀嘅想法啦，咁但係似乎呢個都係即係唯一出路。我哋香港人點樣可以再有一種抗衡係持久嘅落去咯？
好啊，唔該曬許智峰啊，交俾阿 Grace。
So just now, Albert asked, like, what do Ted expect to happen in the future, and what strategies he thinks that it will work for Hong Kongers or in general. If we see like there is a trend of China continue to doing the same things that it's been doing, and in Sam's work or in the context of the UK, like I remember reading the Intelligence Committee report that's being published quite recently. Like they've highlighted a lot of the risk that they see, and they're like, why isn't the UK government doing anything about those things? And so I would like, and the answer is there's lack of political will, as you said, and you have addressed why there is a lack of political will just now. So I like the question to you, Sam, like, what do you expect to happen in the future? Do you think it will change, or the government will just keep on turning a blind eye until like things happen? Because it happened with the overseas police station in the UK. After it's been found out, like the UK government's like, we're investigating, but we haven't found anything that's illegal and that kind of thing. And like, do you have any, you said you're going to launch a campaign about like, especially on Confucius Institution. Can you share a bit more and whether or not you think this strategy of yours can be replicated in other sectors and in countering Chinese influence?
It's a big question. One of the things I think that has to be worked out. I mean, our campaign is going to focus on the higher education sector and on areas where activities connected to the CCP, programs connected to the CCP, we argue are already against the rules. This is the argument I made earlier. And that's something we'll be focusing on. Let's enforce our own rules. Stop making an exception to our rules for the CCP. In other areas, I mean, I haven't spoken much about United Front, stuff to do with the United Front Work Department, etc. But there's lots, I think, that needs to be done if we wish to shed light and expose what happens. I can see one of the things Ted said is that Hong Kongers, it would be great to have this grassroots, low profile, patient activism, you know, making a difference in your sector, in your workplace, explaining this stuff to ignorant Westerners who've been brought up in a free society like myself. People don't understand, they just don't understand often in the UK that if you are a Hong Konger or someone from the PRC, you are vulnerable in some respects. And your freedom to say what you want and do what you want politically is limited by the threat of action against you or your family. People simply don't understand that. It's stupid, I know, but people don't get it. You know, we haven't had a dictatorship in the UK for a while, and we thought the Cold War was over and the Soviets were gone, and we, you know, people are, you know, don't often look beyond their own lives and their own political culture. I speak to so many people my age, but also older, people who should know better, who just don't understand. Take universities. If you are a student from the PRC or from Hong Kong, and you want, as so many students do and should want to do, to be involved in political activism at your university, there is a limit. If you start saying the CCP is terrible for China, the CCP does all these evil things, blah, 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 there's a good chance you will face consequences. You will be told that what you're doing is not acceptable by someone. It could be someone who works at a Confucius Institute, and by the way, that does happen. We can't always publicize all the cases that we're made aware of, but it does happen. It might be someone from the CSSA, it could be anything. The message will get to you, no, you're overstepping the line. So I really want to transmit this message to your audience, explain this dynamic to people who are from the UK or Australia or from Canada who don't understand it, who are unfamiliar with it. A lot of these people will be convinced by, oh, we can't get rid of CSSAs, don't victimize Chinese students, it's racist. And it's incredibly impactful for people like that to be told by someone who, you know, looks Chinese to them, that actually, no, this is not racist. This is tackling a system and a dynamic that limits Hong Kongers and Chinese students' potential, their freedoms, etc. Why shouldn't, whether it's on campus or elsewhere, why shouldn't Chinese students have the same rights to freedom of speech and academic freedom as students from Britain or Australia? So the number one thing I think anyone can do from Hong Kong is to just explain the history, the story, what it means, and the limitations it imposes, and the CCP's modus operandi to your neighbours, to your friends. You know, you don't want to go on and on about it. I'm not there, but just to explain, understand that people are ignorant about this stuff here, and it needs to be explained to us.
OK， 多謝阿 Sam 啊，嚇，咁咧就阿 Sam 咪講咗一啲佢嘅睇法啦。咁我簡單講啦，佢覺得就話最重要嘅就話喺英國呢邊啦，即係政府民間都要即係切實咁執行一啲英國本身有嘅一啲規矩啦，嚇，唔好為中國嘅行為或者話孔子學院呢類咁嘅組織嘅一啲唔規範行為啦，提供一種即係例外主義嘅一個諗法啦，佢哋唔會係例外嘅，係嘛？咁佢亦都覺得啦，喺呢度啦，應該有一個 United Front， 一個所謂統一戰線，即係去揭發有啲咩事發生緊。咁咧就大家咧就佢亦都認為香港人唔好太過 low profile， 唔好太過低姿態嚇，應該咧係夠膽企出嚟。咁亦都唔好俾一啲講法，你作為一個香港人，咁中國嘅人嘅身份咧，你就可能唔值得享有同英國人一樣咁多嘅政治啊、言論嘅自由呢啲講法咧，佢認為唔合理㗎嚇。 咁最後咧，佢就話大家唔好俾自己嘅身份同埋而家喺呢度嘅處境咧限制咗我哋。咁我相信呢啲講法咧都係對喺呢度嘅香港人咧好重要嘅啊。咁時間關係啦，咁我哋就時間到呢度啦。咁我哋亦都睇到咧，暫時睇唔到啲咩提問啦。時間亦都比我哋想象中長咗啊。咁我喺呢度咧再一次多謝兩位嘉賓啦嚇，多謝 Gracia 啦嚇。I would like to say thank you to Ted and Sam for your time and your sharing. I think it will be quite important and quite valuable for Hong Kong people to look into the situation deeper in the future. And we look forward that we are going to have a united front against the CCP's infiltration in the future too. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
今日
you.
到此為止啊，多謝大家。
拜拜。